Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa with me, Yeneli. Your headlines on the continent tonight. Tensions mount in Guinea ahead of the final results of the country's presidential election. Internet is disrupted and scuffles break out between police and protesters on the streets of Conakry. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari says 51 civilians have been killed in recent unrest. A 24-hour curfew remains in place in Lagos as authorities try to restore order following mass protests against police brutality. And stay tuned for part 4 of our series on Ivorian voters. Today we take you to Bouaké, a former rebel stronghold in the centre of the country. But first, internet outages, telecommunication disruptions and gunfire have been reported in Guinea. As demonstrators contest the partial results that continue to pour in. Tensions are running high since Sunday's presidential election there. 82-year-old incumbent Alpha Condé's main rival is former Prime Minister And. Our correspondents that went to Conakry this week, they met with people who are worried about the political situation developing there.
Deserted streets, closed shops, even the usually bottlenecked roads of the capital are clear. Days after the presidential election, Conakry is struggling to get back to normal after deadly violence erupted in the suburbs on Wednesday. Many voters are hoping that tensions will settle as the wait for result continues.
Le pays s'en va pas. Il y a de violence partout. C'est que moi j'ai envie de dire à toutes les populations de se calmer. On veut que le pays là soit calmé comme les autres.
In Kaloum, in the centre of Conakry, the usual hustle and bustle is slowly returning. But the street vendors say it's still too early to go back to work.
La situation actuelle est très grave. C'est très grave. La façon dont on tue les gens ici, c'est très grave. Vraiment, moi, tout ce que je demande que ça cesse.
Le développement d'un pays, d'abord, c'est la justice. Il faut qu'on maintienne ça. Je dis ça aux dirigeants de maintenir la justice dans le pays. La légalité entre nous.
Security forces have been deployed throughout the capital. Many refuse to be filmed. People in Dixon, in the suburbs of Conakry, are afraid of a return of violence and are hoping supporters of both President Alpha Condé and his rival And will accept the election's outcome peacefully. The UFDG, the main opposition party, has already cried foul. Its leader, And, didn't wait for the official tally before claiming that he'd won the first round outright.
Nigeria's president says that 51 civilians were killed in recent anti-police brutality protests. Muhammadu Buhari blames the death on hooligans and added that security forces have been using, quote, extreme restraint. According to Amnesty International, on Tuesday alone, soldiers killed 12 people when they shot into a crowd singing the national anthem. Laurent Bersteker has the latest.
Burnt tires and vehicles littered the streets of Lagos a day after Muhammadu Buhari addressed the nation in a speech meant to appease tensions. As a relative sense of calm returned to Nigeria's economic capital, many residents said they hadn't been convinced by the president's announcements.
Talk aimlessly, lacking credibility and vision.
We expected him to say something to condemn the killing. He never said such, never made mention of it in his broadcast.
Buhari broke his silence for the first time on Thursday following weeks of nationwide protests against police brutality. The president said he had heard the message loud and clear, but urged Nigerians to stay home as he demanded a return to law and order. He also failed to mention the deadly Lekki shooting, where soldiers opened fire on thousands of peaceful protesters on Tuesday. Following Buhari's address, police and military reinforcements were deployed across the country. In Lagos, residents had to raise their hands as they passed through a hastily assembled checkpoint, manned by armed men presenting themselves as police officers.
We are demonstrating, telling them to be conscious and control themselves so that to avoid future occurrence of the previous violence we have been facing in the country.
Despite Buhari's call for calm, there were reports of several violent incidents on Friday. In Lagos, groups of young men set up roadblocks and were demanding money to let vehicles through, a sign of the lingering economic uncertainty facing Nigeria's youth.
Sudan and Israel have agreed to normalize ties. The US brokered the deal between Prime Ministers Abdallah Hamdok and Benjamin Netanyahu. Washington is set to remove Khartoum from the US's list of state sponsors of terrorism. The deal also includes Israeli aid and investment to Sudan. First on their agenda, though, is cooperation on industries such as agriculture and aviation. It's a moment that will go down in history, according to the UN's envoy to Libya. Rival administrations that struck a permanent ceasefire deal in Geneva on Friday. The North African country has been plunged in violence since the removal of Muammar Gaddafi a decade ago. Libya is split between the UN-backed government in Tripoli and military commander Khalifa Haftar's forces. With the ink barely dry, Libya's National Oil Corporation announced it was resuming exports from 2 terminals in the east of the country. Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent in Geneva on the details of the deal.
Late this morning at the UN's Geneva headquarters, the two sides are under the auspices of the UN acting special representative for Libya, Stephanie Williams. They basically agreed to a countrywide and permanent ceasefire with immediate effect, the return to barracks from the front lines of the warring sides, and thirdly, the departure of all mercenaries and foreign troops within 3 months from Libya. There are two basically elements here. One is how much the great powers that on the sidelines have been backing various sides in this conflict basically decide to put the tap on the violation of the arms embargo and to restrain the various players from continuing to participate. We're talking Turkey and Qatar backing the government in Tripoli, and the UAE, Egypt, and others backing the national army in the east. So that's one element. Second, and very important, is the economy of the country has imploded. So whether they can get their act together in agreeing going forward on how to reconstitute the economy and the social infrastructure and how to reunite the country, that will be critical as well because it's all broken up.
John Zarakostas there reporting for us. Now, Gabon has eased some of its lockdown measures as the number of confirmed coronavirus cases dropped in the past few weeks. The country had one of the strictest lockdowns in the region, but now restaurants are open again and a ban on gatherings of more than 10 people has been lifted. Our correspondents filed this report.
A popular leisure spot by the seaside in Libreville. This restaurant can now welcome clients again as long as they wear face masks and respect social distancing. This group of friends is meeting for the first time in almost 7 months. They say the precautions are worth it if they allow them to see each other in person.
After several months of lockdown, we're really happy about the news. Lockdown was very difficult. We had to use instant messaging or video calls.
Though restaurants are reopening, access to the seaside remains restricted. Police watch over the coast to stop anyone accessing the beach or the water, much to the dismay of some visitors.
Does the coronavirus know if it is or if it isn't a restaurant? There are people who do not drink alcohol, people who don't smoke, but they find pleasure in spending their time at the beach to release stress.
Unlike restaurants, bars will remain closed. Bruno Abesolo lost patience after investing all of his savings in his establishment, almost 18,000 euros lost. Like many bar owners, without revenue for 6 months, nor help from the government, he was forced to lay off his staff.
There is no reason why bars should remain closed. We need the government to guide us instead. There are many who have lost their businesses because the crisis has continued. Landlords do not allow people to stay without paying.
As coronavirus numbers continue to fall, authorities believe they have gone through the worst, hence the relaxation of COVID-19 restrictions. The next phase kicks in from October 30. It will allow the resumption of services in churches and mosques as long as a maximum of only 30 persons are allowed to gather for worship.
And finally, in the run-up to Ivory Coast's presidential election, our correspondents have been travelling up and down the country, visiting different towns and cities to find out what issues really matter to local people. Tonight, we take you to Bouaké, the country's second largest city, that's also known for being a former rebel stronghold. But its residents are now hoping to ditch that label. Sam Bradpiece has more.
Today we are in Bouaké, the historic capital of the Bouaké people, one of the largest ethnicities in Ivory Coast. Bouaké sits right at the centre of the country, at a crossroads with roads leading to Mali and Burkina Faso. The city was occupied by rebels beginning in the country's civil war in 2002, right the way through to 2010. Since then, it has struggled to shake its rebel reputation. 10 years on from the country's post-electoral crisis, the scars of war are still visible here. The old French high school was bombed by pro-Gbagbo forces in 2012. A sign commemorates the attack. But with the construction of a new stadium, housing and a marketplace, the people of Bouaké are looking to leave the city's violent past behind. So I'm here with Adama Fondio, a former member of the rebel forces. Adama, can you explain to us, what are you doing in your life at the moment?
At the moment, I'm doing nothing. I do little jobs here and there to make ends meet.
And is it difficult?
Yes, it's very difficult.
And what are your hopes going forward into this presidential election? What would you like to change?
Firstly, what we want from the next president is cohesion amongst Ivorians, a sacred union between Ivorians. We need to build an Ivorian nation. We need to think as Ivorians before we think of ourselves, our tribes, or our religions.
With elections just around the corner, many will be hoping for calm. Memories are still fresh of the civil war and the subsequent post-electoral crisis, and nobody here in Bouaké will want to revisit this city's dark past.
That's it for Eye on Africa. Tonight's show was produced by Selena Sykes and her team behind the camera.